unity, recognize that we are different and yet also similar. So help us as we try to come together to disciple one another, to build up your church so that we can go out and proclaim the gospel more efficiently and effectively. We pray this through your Son's name. Amen. All right. So we are at lesson number 4, God's purposes for similarity in the church. So up to this point, we've been talking a lot about diversity and the unity that comes in diversity and how and why. And last week was a little bit of a pivot because we started talking about the image of God and how that relates to where we are. So the image of God is obviously something that we all have in common. So then what do we do then with all of the things that we have in common, right? Because if the class title's unity and diversity, right, it assumes that there's going to be some diversity that we're going to have to work through to create unity. There's going to be different things about different people in the church, but the gospel is the thing that we all have in common. What do we do with everything that we already have in common? Where does that come into play with diversity? Where does that come into play with unity? How do we handle the similarity? Do we have to handle the similarity? Or do we just assume everything's fine because it's all the same? So what we're going to do the next 45 minutes, give take, is take a look at some of God's purposes for similarity in the church, how we work through some of the similarity, and how we can use it to... And we're even going to find a little bit of diversity in the similarity. So first, let's start with the idea then of the dangers of thinking about this. So similarity is great because we have to understand everything that God's built into our congregation, not just a diversity. But there's 2 things we need to avoid, kind of ditches on either side of the road. And one is that if we only focus on similarity, then that's all we're going to focus on, right? We're only going to have friends that look like us, that think like us, that talk like us. Or even if our church gets big enough and we have a spectrum of diversity, it's those things that make us diverse that we're going to focus on, and then we're going to end up with a bunch of little small pockets of similarity, not one big church. So in one sense, we've got this danger where we have only moms of young kids hanging out with moms of young kids, and singles with singles, and widows with widows. And again, even looking at similarities, there's a reason for all of that. But we can't just focus on it. We can't just live in and around that similarity. We've been arguing for the last 3 weeks that there's a purpose in diversity. So let's look at that similarity and see what we can do with it. Because again, either on the macro scale, it's a whole bunch of small pockets of similarity with no unity, or on the micro scale, it's just everyone being their own little selves. So let's not do that. We don't want to do that. The other thing that we don't want to do is we don't want to fall in the ditch on the other side of the road and feel guilty for the only things that we have in common, the friendships that we have that have more than Christ in common. So again, I fall into one of those pockets, right? I've got little kids. I've got a wife. I'm married. I live in Watertown. Oh, hey, guess what? There's a bunch of other people that are married with small kids that live in Watertown. So if I gravitate towards those families, then do I need to feel bad about that? Because, like, there's people like me in Watertown, and we all live in Watertown, and that's my small group. And then there's Dave and Jamie. So it's like, what do we do? Do I feel bad about that? Do I purposely reach out and do some other things to where I'm not being in those groups? Do I just avoid those people now? Do I have to balance them? What do I have to do? How do I work through that? So let's talk about this. Let me give you some real practical advice. Let's look at some scriptural advice and figure out how we can avoid falling in the ditch on either side of those road. So first, I think there's a few problems for thinking like this. And one, we need to recognize that God has made us with similarity. So God made us to be understandable. And one of the best ways to understand somebody is to have common shared experiences, right? I can't talk about marriage relationship stuff with someone that's not married. I can't talk about kid stuff with someone that doesn't have kids. It's an interesting place to be like, well, philosophically or theoretically, I know that children are. It's helpful for me to look at a kid doing something and be like, oh yeah, my kid does that. And then to go to their parent and be like, hey, how do you deal with the kid when they do the thing? And they're like, oh man, you don't. I'm like, oh great, thanks. But no, there's the whole reason of that understanding part of us comes from shared experiences. So if you can't relate to somebody, then you're gonna kind of miss it. In our life circumstances, the demographics that we fall ourselves into, like I heard at one time somebody said they remember the same presidents I remember. You know, like that's an interesting thought, right? Your long time experience or your short time experience with life outside, you know, bracketed by presidential administrations. You know, think about it like that. That shared common background. I'm from West Virginia. You guys think thoughts about West Virginia, okay? I think thoughts about Wisconsin. You know, so like having that shared experience with other people, you know, I notice it when I'm with my in-laws because two of my in-laws have married people from West Virginia. So guess what happens when all the family gets together? The three of us West Virginians all kind of wander off to the side and like the rest of the family does their thing. Or when some of the family things happening, like we'll just kind of look at each other and be like, yeah, that's, you know, because we have shared experience, we understand, and we're also the in-laws. So it's like, you know, we circle with each other. We're looking for understanding, and it's shared background that helps us with understanding. But also, that leads to a spiritual benefit, right? So if you're thinking this, like, you know, I can only be a certain friend group or I should, you know, try to work through that balance, there's real spiritual benefits to relationships where we share more than Jesus. So we talked about this last week, right? You should have friend groups where the only thing you have in common is Jesus. But again, there's benefits to thinking about other things that you have in common with and how it applies. Because otherwise, you end up sitting there. You're paralyzed, not knowing what to do. You're looking for trying to find that balance between friends that I only have in common Christ, friends that I have demographic stuff in common with, people that I have experience in common with. You try to like rack and stack all those things and figure out how you're supposed to divide your time, and you spend all your time figuring and none of your time doing. So it's a false dichotomy. It's not like you have to sit down and say, I'm going to do evangelism or my job, right? I can evangelize while I do my job. I can do my job and still evangelize, right? I hope. You know, so when we think about our friend groups, we need to think the same way. I can have friends who are only my friends because I go to church with them. All that we have in common is Christ. And I can have friends that have a shared experience with me because we both work in the same place. We both the same stage of life. We both have similar histories. So that's the rest of the class, is we're going to extrapolate on all of those things. Questions, comments, concerns with where we're going? All right, let's go there then. So let's look at some of the value of similarity in our church. So we'll start with the apostles. We'll back it up even further. We'll start with the disciples before they became apostles. What did they have in common? Anything? Yeah, there were some fishermen. What else? Yeah, some of them were from the same place. What else? Yeah, they all had the same cultural identity. What was super different about them, though? Anything? Were there still differences among them? Oh, yeah. One of them was a tax collector. So he was probably filthy rich, and everyone probably hated him. What else? Yeah, there was a religious and political fanatic among them who probably at some point in time would have tried to kill the tax collector. Yet all of these people come together with their shared and unshared experiences. And even Jesus, he picks these 12 men, but then he picks an inner circle of 3, Peter, James, and John. What do they have in common? Someone said it earlier. Yeah, they were the fishermen. So yet inside of this group of friends, obviously they did more than just be friends, there's a smaller group of people with shared experiences. So there must be some value in that. I think so. I think that we can look at that and say that there's a reason, there's a purpose for it. I think similarity gives us some understanding. I think similarity helps us not have to ask questions. I think it helps us be more understanding. So let's look at some scripture to help us understand this point. And since I don't have the slides to show it to you, I'm going to need some people to read. Could I get someone to read Titus chapter 2, verses 1 through 5? Just whoever gets there, if you would, please read it. So who's doing the training and education here? What's the relationships in Titus 2? Specifically? Yeah, with whom? Oh, okay. So we've got older women training younger women and older men training younger men. Why doesn't your Sunday school teacher just do all that work? Or the pastor from the pulpit on Sundays? Why the recommendation to Titus to set up a discipling ministry like this? Oh, so our pastor's not a woman? Yeah, I mean, that's a reality of the situation, right? If you're talking about shared experiences, if you're talking about these stages and positions in life, who's better to instruct a person who is coming into that stage of life than somebody who's already come through it, who is in the middle of it, who has come out of it? You know, if we're looking at how we're setting this up, it makes a lot more sense to have a lot more understanding. You'll get a lot more practical education, practical experience. You'll get a lot more understanding from people who have already been there and done that. There's a benefit to that. I haven't experienced what it's like to give birth to a child. I mean, like, I've been in the room where it happens. I've cleaned up after it. I was a hospital housekeeper for a number of years. That doesn't mean anything. You know, like, I'm just standing there. It's literally all I did. Stand there. Held her hand. Told her she was doing a great job. I mean, like, that's pretty useless. So when we think about these shared experiences, there's a reason to have those shared experiences. That's why we don't leave everything to the pastors. We do this because we have a command in Scripture to do it, because it will work. Here's a couple more verses. 2 Corinthians 1:4, Hebrews 4:15. We'll read them both. So just when someone gets to Hebrews, we'll read it after 2 Corinthians. So I'll take 2 Corinthians first. In Hebrews, please.
For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin.
So, why do bad things happen to good people? Yeah, but I think we see an answer here in these two texts, right? Yeah, so that you can help other people who are experiencing likewise things. Okay, you're not going to be the only person in the world that something terrible happens to. Maybe there's some unique circumstance to you that is, influences that, but categorically, things happen to people. So when these terrible things happen, we now have the opportunity, as someone who has experienced something like unto it, to go to that person and to be a conduit of grace and mercy. Because who is also doing that for us every day? It's Christ, right? He's the high priest that goes into the throne room of heaven that we're going to see next week, I think. This week? When are we doing throne room of heaven in Revelation? Today and next week. All right. We're going to see the throne room of heaven in Sunday morning. all right? Christ is there. He's interceding on our behalf because he knows what we're going through. He was born of a woman. He was hungry. He was thirsty. He was sad. He died. You and me, okay? The whole death part, that changes things. But we're hungry. We're thirsty. We're sad. We've gone through hurt. So some of those things happen to us so that we can have a better understanding and a better encouragement for other people that have done it. Because you're not alone. That's one of the purposes of church is community, right? I come to this community because there are people that I know have experienced some of the same things I've experienced. Broken families, broken lives, personal bad decisions. Okay? We've all been there. We've gone through a lot of things together. We can come together as a church and support each other because Christ categorically supports us that way. So, just real quick, anybody want to share an example of a time that they've been able to interact with somebody who's encouraged them because they've gone through the same thing? Just a second of vulnerability. Anybody? No? All right. Think about it. I think that understanding then also builds trust. 1 Peter 3, 6, and 7, please. Somebody who gets there.
As Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you are her children, if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered.
All right. We're supposed to live with each other in an understanding way. The Greek there is literally according to knowledge. So guess what? How do you gain knowledge? Like you go out and seek it. You got to work at it. You read a book, go to a class. You watch a YouTube video from a reputable source. Like you're doing something, right, to go out there. It's work that you have to do. Okay? Our relationships are the same way. You have to work at them. Now here, specifically in the context of marriage, the advice here is that there's some trust involved, knowing that in this relationship, the trust ultimately goes to God, not individuals. But the advice in how to get there is to know each other, to understand each other. What's the most intimate relationship where people are going to have to develop some kind of similarity? It's marriage, right? I mean, just the reality of living in the same four walls of a house. Like, you're going to have to develop similarities. Differences too, but similarity. So if there's a purpose in this similarity here, I think it's that it's the understanding and the consideration so that we can develop a relationship of trust. And you can't do that without that similarity, without knowing, without understanding each other. So while this is specific to the marriage context, I think we can take a step back and look at all of our relationships and say that that similarity can build trust. I've got a common starting point with you, so when you say, oh yeah, it's going to be fine, or it will work out like this, or that will be hard, I can trust that you know what you're talking about. And I can trust that God has put you in my life to help me do that. So when we look at some of these points of similarities, as we're looking at encouraging, as we're looking at understanding, it's ultimately pointing towards trust. This is what discipleship is you're working through this process of understanding and knowledge to get to a point of deeper trust with Christ, with God. So I think you need this kind of similarity and able to do that. And then Galatians gives us a much more positive example of all this. So Galatians 2, 11 through 21 is a little bit of a longer passage, but if somebody would be willing, please, I'd appreciate it. Go ahead, Eric.
When Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, because he stood to death. For before certain men came to me, as he was eating with the Gentiles. But when they came, he drew back and separated himself, fearing so that he would be afflicted. And the rest of the Jews acted hypocritically along with him, so that even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. When I saw that their conduct was not established in true
All right, so Paul sees Peter with an issue. Peter's basically saying, look, if you want to be a good Christian, you got to be a good Jew. And we know that that's not exactly what the church took. Paul, going to confront him about this, tells him to his face, hey man, you're wrong. Peter listened to Paul. Why do you think Peter took Paul's admonishment? I mean, aside from the work of God in his heart. Like, earthly reasons for Peter to have listened to Paul. Larry. Yes, Paul's 100% right, and we would all hope that when confronted with the obvious truth, we would accept it as obvious truth. Okay, what else? They did have a previous relationship. They knew who each other were. They had had contacts. They understood that they were both working for the same goal. What else? Did they share a background? What kind of background? Paul's like the most Jewish of Jewish guys, right? He checked all the boxes. A Pharisee, from the right family, had the right teachers, okay? Zealous, according to the law. Blameless, according to the law, okay? So here's a very Jewish person coming to Peter and saying, right. Now, if a Gentile had come to Peter, I had come to Peter, and been like, hey man, what are you doing? What's with all these dietary restrictions? Peter listened to me? No, he would have educated me as some ignorant Gentile. Could he turn that back around on Paul? Probably not. No, absolutely not. That similarity, that shared background allowed Paul to confront Peter, Peter to see the error of his ways, and for the church to get up on its own 2 feet again. Now again, grace of God in Peter's life, we understand that too. But from an earthly perspective, from a down here, me looking at how this works perspective, that kind of pre-existing relationship, that kind of bold confrontation with the truth, that was accepted because of similarities. So this exhortation to correction, this gives grace and understanding, right? Parents, we struggle with this with our kids, right? Because our kids don't recognize that, right? They don't understand that shared experience yet. They think that they're probably different, that things are different. Okay, yeah, things are different from the early 90s to today. I totally understand that. But categorically, I have made some of the same decisions you've made. You should be listening to me. I think we have a context for this inside of our relationships in the home. But I think this equally applies to our relationships inside the church and with other people. It's that shared community, it's shared background that allows us to receive some of that correction. And it's that shared background, it's that shared experience that allows us to receive grace and comfort when we need it. So I think it goes both ways. I think it works both ways. So any questions or comments about the purposes of similarity in the church, the value of it? Anybody think of an experience where they've been encouraged by somebody yet? Okay, go ahead, Dave.
Well, when I unexpectedly lost my job last fall, when I went to the prayer meeting, there were several people, including yourself, that had come over and gave some encouragement words and talked about some experience that y'all had.
Yeah, no thanks. That's a great one. All right, so what do we do? So how do we figure this out in the church, right? We know that there's a value in similarity. We know that we're supposed to strive for unity amongst diversity. So where's the balance? How do we put all those things on a scale and make it work? We need a formula, right? 65.7% of your friends need to be like this. No. Okay, that's not what I'm going to give you. Okay, if you're looking for that answer right now, you're going to be disappointed. I think what we're going to do is instead of look at some sort of fixed percentages, I think we can just talk experientially about some things, okay? So I'm gonna give you a couple reasons here, I think there's 6 of them, to talk about how you can think about these relationships, some guidelines to apply. And I think the first one is that you just need to recognize that you need multiple types of friends, okay? Back when I was in school, it was the food pyramid, right? Build your solid base, do your other things. But now it's what? It's a plate. And you're supposed to look at all the different things and how it fits on a plate. Much more spatially thinking. I like it a lot, actually. Okay? Your friendship should kind of be the same way, right? You should be looking at your friend groups, you should be looking at your experiences, and I think you can look at all of these things and say, yeah, I have some friends who are my only friends because they're Christian. There's no natural reason for me to do it. But that's healthy and important. It's part of my relationships, just like the people that I grew up with, just like the people that I work with, just like my family, just like everybody else who, whatever. So as we look at the plate, I think we're looking at all of those different things and say that, we need a little bit of it. Our goal and our objective is to get to the point to where you don't sit there and say, no one understands me. No one gets me. I feel alone. Because I think if we've gotten to that point, we as a congregation have failed. Because again, if the only thing you have in common with that person is Christ, then you should understand a little bit. But if you have the shared experiences of what you went through and what you went through and who you are with some other people, then that's going to be meaningful too. So you have to find all of those. So ask yourself the same questions we asked ourselves in the first week of class. Who do you talk to after church? Are they all the same age of you? Are they all people who do the same kind of work that you do? Do they all look like you, talk like you, sound like you? Are they all just your family? So when you stop and think about some of these relationships that you have in church, purposefully go out and talk to somebody who you maybe wouldn't talk to. So just think about those. But we do need to recognize the kind of church culture that we have. Okay, it's tempting to say that yes, we all have Christ in common. That whole 1 Corinthians, I'm of Christ type thing. Like, that's great. That's a good starting point for all of us here. But I think the thing that we need to realize is that our church does have a certain culture, a certain feel, a certain majority. So as you look around the congregation, we all kind of look and sound alike. We all have roughly the same socioeconomic background. We're all categorically around here. Right? And those are things that you need to recognize. You can't deny that that's the way our church body is. So looking at that will help you understand that, yeah, okay, my plate's going to be a little differently balanced than maybe a plate of a person that goes to First Baptist in Madison or something. Columbus, Fall River, where we are, who we are, we do need to recognize that this is the culture that our church has, and we need to, yes, lean into it, and yes, also be supportive of it, but just also realize that that is very much the culture so that we can better recognize opportunity for diversity and unity and diversity when it comes along. The next two lessons are going to be counsels for Christian in the majority and counsel for Christian in the minority. What it looks like to operate in those two spheres. And I think what we're going to find out is that there's some good advice in there for how we should build our church with that culture of understanding, knowing where we are and where we're at in that process. So we need then to learn how to build understanding without similarity. That might sound like I'm trying to say that the best way to get to know somebody is to have something in common with them, but I don't think that's necessarily true. There are shared experiences that give us shared understanding, but those shared experiences change and grow over time. Again, if we think about a marriage relationship, does it look the same way on the honeymoon as it does 5 years, 10 years, 30 years later? No, you grow in understanding. You grow in knowledge of each other. So I think in some way, yeah, you can't start that until you've gone through it. I mean, think about this church in the last 5 years. When you first came here, it was you, right? When you walk in the door, it's typically just you. Maybe you had a loose connection to the church, but 2, 3, 5 years later, what's it look like? Hopefully you've made a couple, 3 more connections. Hopefully it looks like you've grown in understanding. Maybe you've volunteered to do some things that have put you in contact with people you wouldn't have ordinarily been in contact with. Maybe you're in the nursery. Maybe you're teaching Sunday school. Maybe you're up here on the stage leading worship. Do you interact with different people in the different ministries of this church? Would you have interacted with those people outside of those circumstances? When I teach junior church, I wouldn't ordinarily interact with those people because they're littler than me. okay? I'm now interacting with those people and their parents. There are things that I only have in common with some of those people is that I teach their kids once a quarter. Okay, there are things now that those kids come to me because we now have a relationship. Great. So, like, that's an opportunity for us in the church to go out there and to build those relationships. So the next step then is maybe your small group. Have those people in your home. Invite them over. Just because you're not apparently similar to other people doesn't mean that you can't grow an understanding with them and they with you. And that looks a lot like discipleship, which is what we're trying to do. But I think, too, we need to realize that some people need more similarity than others. This sounds like selfishness, right? Because it in one way sounds like I need more leisure time than other people, right? Like I'm not going to do something unless something else happens. But I think it is true because there are people with similar shared experiences that maybe congregationally here is unique to them. God put people through circumstances in their life that maybe we haven't had an opportunity to go through yet ourselves. We bring people from West Virginia up here to South Central Wisconsin. Okay, it's going to be a little different for different people. And recognizing that some people might need that connection and it's going to take time for that connection to develop, I think is a fair point. Because if the first person from somewhere, or the first person that is something, or the first person that has had an uncommon experience to us walks through the door, they're kind of like a pioneer trailblazer, right? They're the Ingalls family wandering around. So we need to have an opportunity to realize that it's growth, yes, but one way to make sure that we're not using that as an excuse is to, again, look at that friendship plate and say, the only thing I've got in common with this person is Christ, but I've got that in common with them. Now I need to go find somebody else that maybe has some other shared experiences. And how do you figure that out? You don't unless you start developing that relationship. You don't have that opportunity unless you start talking with these people, having them in small groups, talking to them after service, in between service, the church picnic. You interact with those people, you figure out who those people are, figure out maybe you're one of those people. When you're looking for similarity, you can find it if you go looking, but you have to go looking. So just realizing that there is something out there for people who maybe need that little bit of extra touch, but realize too that similarity isn't necessary, right? The more experiences we have loving other people, the better we'll be in situations where we don't share a lot in common. So we don't want everybody in this church to be the same type of person, think the same way, dress the same way, look the same way, talk the same way. It's trivially, I was having this conversation with CT because we were doing something and something came up and he got a little frustrated with it and he looked at me and he was like, I can't do that because I ain't got none. And I was like, time out, kid. I'm from West Virginia. I can talk like that. Your birth certificate says Wisconsin. You don't have any, okay? Like this is how this works, okay? I'm the different one here. I'm trying to mold you and shape you in a way that you're going to understand. You're already Wisconsin anyway, okay? I need to mold you and shape you to look more like a Wisconsinite, okay? If you're going to talk like your dad, that's going to be an issue, okay? We already live in Watertucky. You don't need to play that stereotype up anymore, okay? But again, thinking about the similarities, that's great, that's awesome. But strive for those relationships where similarity just isn't necessary. And that can be something in the church as simple as an age demographic. Maybe it becomes something else later, I don't know. But if you're practicing it in the church, guess where else you're gonna live it out? Out there, where there really are people that are significantly different from us. So if you're loving here, you're going to be loving there too. So similarity then is a stewardship. Think about it like this. So the church has a desire to glorify the gospel, and you can do that with similarity, but it's a cost and a benefit. The benefit is natural understanding. It helps, right? We do things, we share things because we have so much in common, but then that's the danger, is that we get complacent. When we find ourselves in relationships that only share a few things in common, we stick to those things. But a stewardship is something to be used for God's purposes. So if we only limit our group of contact to people with that similarity, then are we really being a good steward? Did you hide your talent? Did you bury it because you knew your master was a harsh man? Or did you just go put it in the bank because that was the safe thing to do? Now remember, that guy gets rewarded too. Okay? So as we think about how we manage our friendships, manage our relationships, manage our similarities in the church, as we're working towards unity, it's a stewardship. God has entrusted this thing to us. So our community is built on similarity, yes, but it's a stewardship that we have to maintain for His glory. So you can do this in small groups. You can do this with one-on-one friendships. You can do this in between services. So I think when you answer the question, what's the value of similarity in friendship, part of it's going to be comfortableness and understanding, yes. But I don't want that to be the very top of the list. That's part of it. The rest of it is that stretching part of it. The rest of it is that building unity, because you'll find the diversity if you go looking for it. So let's just do a little exercise here for a couple of minutes. Let's just talk broadly about some similarity and some differences that we might have here in the church. So, anybody willing to share where they were living and what they were doing in 1985?
I lived on a farm.
Okay.
I had 4 kids at that time. And we were just a farm boy.
Okay. Who else was doing something in 1985? Dave?
I was living in the same house I'm living in now. But there's a lot more chores, maybe not a lot more chores. I was mowing the same lawn that I'm mowing now, but it was a different piece of equipment. And I suppose my life responsibilities are a lot less back then.
All right. Who else had something going on in 1985?
Lived in Wausau, worked for a sign company.
Okay. I wasn't born yet. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Coming to the same church, and 3 kids, and it wasn't this church.
Right. It was not this church, yeah. All right. What about 1995? Who wants to share what they were doing in 1995? What changed between 85 and 95 for some of you that shared experiences?
Living in Marshall, worked at VA.
Okay. A little bit of a change, right? Wausau to Marshall, sign company to the VA. Okay.
Graduated high school and pumping gas at a full service gas.
You're that old.
I think it was the last one in the region.
Yeah. There was one in Parkersburg where I grew up in. It was the only one, and it was like a family gas station, like it was his dad's or something. And it had always been full service, and it only had 2 pumps, and it was just always full service. And yeah. What else was going on in your guys' lives in 1995?
I had 1 more child, and my first one graduated. And I was doing a lot of cooking, got 3 teenagers.
There you go.
My kids were older, I'm still on the farm.
Okay. I was 7. I had just gotten saved in the basement of South Parkersburg Baptist Church in Sunday school class. All right, what about 2005? What was going on in your guys' lives?
Had my
What else? Kevin? Mazel tov. All right. I was a junior in high school. That was my first year. I went to the UN building in New York for Model UN. So, All right, what about 2015? All right, what's going on in your life in 2015? What changed? That'd be what, 7 years ago? Yeah, 7 years ago. Yeah.
Change churches, that's all.
Okay.
Divorced, built my own house.
Built your own house. Okay. What else? Okay.
2 children under the age of 10.
I had 2 under the age of 5. Yeah. So. All right. Why'd you come here? Why New Testament Baptist Church? Yeah. I think a lot of people are going to say it was the preaching that drew them here. No, go ahead. Tell us the story. Yeah.
We were looking for a church, and we actually were going to, we had a baby. We're actually going to Waterloo. I can't remember who called back then. It was a Baptist church. And they were looking for pastors. So Lee Crockett was from Watertown, we're going way back. He was preaching there. He was amazing. And it would have been so awesome if he would have taken the church. But anyway, they were having candidates come in. My husband, they kept wanting us to join, and we wanted to wait to see who the pastor was.
Sure.
This one guy came in, and we went home, we're like, I hope they don't vote him, and he did. So, we had to leave. And some friends of ours from college were starting this church in 1977.
Mm-hmm.
And so we decided, I think Sunday night was the first time we came, and there was maybe 1 or 2 people there. And we're comfortable from there.
Yeah, yeah, right. And you've been here ever since. So,
Well,
there was a short time, yeah, but yeah, it was so funny because we got the list of churches and the service times, and we had gone to one church on a Sunday morning, and we're like, we'll come up here on Sunday night, and the service time that we found said 7 o'clock. Well, it had changed to be from 6 to 7. So we pull up at the old church, and if you guys know the old church building, the double doors open and you look right down the aisle to the pulpit, and then it's a little, 5-foot hallway to get to where the seats were. So we opened the door at like 10 till 7, 5 till 7, and Pastor Warner was up on praying, and I was like, I thought this was a Baptist church, like they're starting early. So Lisa and I just walk in, and we sit by the first 2 seats when you first walked in, right by the light switch. So like I'm sitting there listening to the light switches hum, and I'm just like, oh, this is gonna be a great church, So Pastor Warner finishes praying, he looks up, the entire congregation stands up and turns around, and it's just me and Lisa sitting in the back. And it's just like, hi, we're new here. And again, that was the only way in and out of the church. So the entire church had to file by us for us to get out. So Pastor Warner came down, we talked to him, we talked to literally every human being in that church that Sunday night that was there. And after we talked to everybody, literally, we were like, okay, well, we should actually come back for a service. The people seem nice. So we did. I think it was maybe only the second or third church that we came to when we moved up here. And it was one service, and we were like, yeah, this is it, and this is where we stayed. Anybody else? All right. Well, I hope you discovered a little bit of similarity with somebody here. I hope you discovered a point of contact or some information about somebody that maybe you want to talk a little bit more with them about. hopefully we found a little diversity too, so that we can build together some unity and to move forward with it. Hopefully you can take some of the things that we just talked about and talk about those things with some of the people here in the room. So I'm going to close up and give you a little bit of opportunity to do that. So let me pray. Gracious God, thank you for this church and the people that you have brought to it. You, in your infinite wisdom, have worked out things to bring you the most glory, and we are thankful that you allow us to participate in that plan, that you take into account